Hi everyone, let's get started. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Wales launch event for Britain Talks Climate 2024. What we're going to be doing today is looking specifically at some of the insights that are relevant to Wales from the survey and focus groups on Britain Talks Climate that we've carried out over the last few months. I'm going to start just by doing a brief introduction to us and some of the partner organisations. So I'm Alex Randall, I'm Head of Programmes at Climate Outreach. Climate Outreach is an organisation that for 20 years has been focused on public engagement around climate change. We use lots of different methods to try and increase the diversity and breadth of the conversation, the public conversation about climate change, and bring more people into the climate change debate and discussion. What we're presenting today is the insights from one of our long-running projects, Britain Talks Climate, and specifically the insights from the most recent iteration of that project that are focused on Wales. The project this time has been a collaboration between ourselves at Climate Outreach, More in Common, and we have people from More in Common joining us on the webinar today, and with support and sponsorship from the European Climate Foundation. We're also very grateful to two partner organisations who helped us specifically with the Welsh element of this. The Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth and DTA Wales, and we have a representative from DTA Wales joining us as part of the Q&A discussion today as well. So that's a very brief intro to the partner organisations, the funders, and what we're all about. So let's move on with the webinar. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce us to a couple of the key findings from the Britain Talks Climate research. And the headline findings are these. Firstly, that people want climate leadership. I think we've moved from a point maybe 10 or 15 years ago where people were skeptical or reticent about climate change and the transition to a more sustainable society and the changes that that might bring. Whereas what the survey results show, what the data and focus groups show from our recent research is that people are actually keen on climate leadership. They are looking to government and they are looking to leaders to provide that leadership moving forward towards net zero. Secondly, people broadly feel positive about government intervention on climate change. People are no longer as skeptical or cynical about the measures and policies that will need to be introduced in order to tackle climate change, and people broadly feel positive about many of those changes. So I think that is those insights are really, really key, and they represent a huge change compared to what we know the public felt, say, 10 or 15 years ago. So we really are operating in a very, very different environment, a very, very different landscape of public opinion when it comes to climate change at the moment. Those insights are true across the UK. We polled across the UK, and they are equally true in Wales. And it is some of the specific nuances of the insights in Wales that we're going to be focusing on over the next hour. Okay, thank you. If we can go to the next slide. I'm going to introduce you now to some of the people that we have on the webinar who will be joining us for the Q&A and also providing some insights as well. I've already introduced myself. I'm Alex. I'm Head of Programmes at Climate Outreach. We'll be hearing more from my colleague Emma James, who is a researcher at Climate Outreach, and she has led the Britain Talks Climate research and specifically generated many of the insights that we're going to be hearing more about today. Jenna Cunningham is a research and data analyst at More in Common. More in Common, as I've explained, are a key partner for us in carrying out this research and generating the insights. We'll also be joined during the Q&A by my colleague Namira Hamid, who is the advocacy manager at Climate Outreach, and she'll be providing some insights on how we can use the information in Britain Talks Climate to kind of move political conversations forward. We'll also be joined by Matt Swan, Head of Outreach and Engagement at DTA Wales. As I've explained, DTA Wales and the Centre for Alternative Technology helped us develop some of the survey questions and methodology that focus specifically on generating insights relevant to Wales during this research. So it is a great pleasure to welcome all of those people to the call today, and you will be hearing more from them throughout the hour and specifically in the Q&A session that we have coming up later. So thank you for everyone for joining us. If I can go to the next slide, please. First, though, we're going to hear a short introduction from Ellen Shepherd, who is representing the Welsh Government and is Director for Climate Change and Fuel Poverty at the Welsh Government. So, Ellen, I will hand over to you now to provide a short introduction to yourself and to lead the webinar with a few insights. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alex. Bore da, a diolch yn fawr iawn am y gwahoddiad I siarad gyda chi heddi. So good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you today. As Alex mentioned, I'm Ellen Shepherd, Deputy Director for Climate and Fuel Poverty at the Welsh Government. And Wales has some pretty ambitious targets to meet on its path to meet net zero emissions by 2050. And many of you will be familiar with the carbon budget system that we have, which gives us 5 yearly steps on the way to 2050, and they get harder and harder as we get closer to that 2050 mark. And we need to see action from all sectors of the economy to deliver emission reductions, from agriculture to housing, from transport to power generation and so forth. What's clear is that we can't do this on our own. The Climate Change Committee reported in 2019 that 62% of emission reductions will need some form of societal and behavioural change. And this includes adopting low carbon technologies and making changes to the way we live our lives. We also know that Wales has been through industrial revolutions in the past, and they've not always been fair. And this transformation that we need to see to 2050 needs to be different. Making this a fair and just transition is very important to this government. So taking those 2 points, so we need action from everybody and we need the transition to be just. Good policy making and decision taking is done with implementation and deliverability firmly in mind. And people have a legitimate expectation to be involved in the decisions that affect them. So there's no point us in government developing or trying to implement a policy if we're not taking people's starting points into account or taking people's ability to change into account. And this is where using behavioural science to inform our approach is key, as is engaging people in decisions around the choices to tackling climate change. Welsh Government published its strategy for public engagement last year in 2023, and that sets out a framework and guiding principles around how the Welsh Government, in collaboration with other people and other groups and other organisations, will engage people in decision making about how to tackle climate change and engage people in the action necessary to tackle climate change and address the climate emergency. So while we're by no means perfect and there's always more we could do, we're really proud to be ahead of the game on climate communications. Our methodology is informed by the work of climate outreach and others, and we're grateful for that input. We're building year on year on how we engage the public on climate change. We're building on Wales Climate Week, enabling and encouraging communities and community groups to hold climate conversations, and they're feeding directly into our policy development. So over the last 6 months, for example, these have been themed around the just transition and how do we move from where we are now to where we need to be in a fair and equitable way. And these fed directly into the consultation that we held over the tail end of 2023 and into 2024 on a framework for just transition to enable decision makers to take those factors into account in taking policy decisions. So more to come on that later this year. And last year, we also launched our digital hub, Climate Action Wales, which gives advice and further information on the choices we can make and the action we can all take to reduce our impact on the planet. And this is a really important source of information and advice and guidance to those who are looking either to take their first steps on that journey or to deepen the actions that they are taking to reduce their impact. So if you haven't checked it out already, please do that, but after this webinar, of course. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the insights and the latest research from the group today. It's really valuable for us to understand what's different in Wales, the changes, the nuances and the approaches that inform what we do, not just what we do, but also how we do it, how we communicate and engage on climate change. So I'll stop there and hand back to Alex. I'm really looking forward to the presentations today and the discussions with the panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen. If we can go to the next slide, please. It's now my pleasure to introduce Matt Swan from DTA Wales. As I explained already, we had two partner organisations helping us shape the research in Wales. One of them was DTA, the other was the Centre for Alternative Technology. So I'm going to hand over now to Matt from DTA Wales, just to provide a few minutes of introduction and insight before we move on to looking at the research in more detail. Over to you, Matt.
Diolch, Alex. Bore da pawb. Good morning, everybody, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I am the Joint Head of Outreach and Engagement at DTA Wales, which is the Development Trust Association Wales. So we are an independent and not-for-profit membership organisation which was established 2003 to support community-led social enterprises, groups and businesses across Wales. And we are empowering local organisations and initiatives who are driving change in their communities for a brighter future. So we see our mission as to be able to be empowering and to enable community-led regeneration and growth and sustainability across Wales. So as has already been said, last year we were asked, along with the Centre for Alternative Technology, to help out, draft some questions which were specific to Wales within the Britain Talks Climate Survey, and we're very happy to do so, and glad we could. And just we have one of our programmes that we're currently running is called Egin, which in Welsh means sort of new shoots, new sprouts, which is focusing on climate change. And through that programme, we're supporting community organisations of all shapes and sizes around Wales to take their first steps in climate action. It's funded by the Dormant Assets Scheme and administered by the Lottery's Sustainable Steps Wales programme. So through this Egin programme, we're supporting groups who might not normally feel included in conversations around climate or sustainability, yet may be the most impacted by it. We have a team of facilitators based all around Wales, and their job is to find and work with these groups, discuss with the groups what they think about climate change and what the sorts of things they might feel that they are able to do to tackle it in their own situation, and then to kind of shape those ideas into a written down action plan that the group owns. We know that it can be very hard for groups to know where to start and exactly what to do. So we then connect these community groups with peer mentors. And so we've got a large pool of people who we call peer mentors across Wales who've already done similar projects and are happy to share their knowledge and their skills to help groups make those changes that they want to see. So through doing all this, we hope that we're able to inspire and enable a much wider movement of taking action at the community level, really, on climate change. And the new research from Britain Talks Climate is really useful for both our facilitators and the peer mentors, as it gives them a richer understanding of the range of attitudes and the approaches that they might encounter as they discuss climate change with people who may be from a wide variety of backgrounds. So it's very encouraging for us to learn from the research that Welsh citizens know that climate change is happening and that they are motivated to take action. So yeah, we want to thank Climate Outreach and their partners for running this survey and producing this research that's going to be shared with us in more detail today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt. I will now hand over directly to my colleague, Emma.
Thank you so much, Alex and Ellen and Matt, for all of your brilliant introductions. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma James, the lead researcher on this 2024 update of Britain Talks Climate. It's really great to be here today, and I'm really excited to share with you some of our Wales insights specifically. I wanted to start today with our 3 key findings for the research, and these are our key findings across Britain. So the first being appetite for climate action is strong and enduring. The second, climate leadership is more likely to win votes than lose them. It offers a source of hope and the potential for reconnection. And third, people don't want to be left alone with this. Prioritise what's tangible and make transition fair. So what we're really seeing through this work is that there is this desire and appetite for climate action, for climate leadership, and that need for fairness and the transition to be fair and not being left alone with this. And so we're seeing this across Britain, but this is really landing in Wales as well. And so now I'd like to tell a little bit of a story of how we got to these key findings, and I'll be referring to these key findings throughout the session today. And I'm going to start with a very brief intro into what is Britain Talks Climate and the 7 British segments. And I'll then go through some of our Wales insights on appetite for climate action, climate leadership, fairness, and specific climate policies. And I will then hand back to Alex, who will take us through some of the recommendations for policymakers and communicators that are coming out of this work. And then, of course, as has already been said, there'll be some time for questions at the end. So what is Britain Talks Climate? Britain Talks Climate is a resource to help us engage with the British public on climate change. It exists to help us better understand and engage with people's priorities, their questions, and their concerns. And it really helps us tell clearer, more compelling climate stories that resonate with people of different backgrounds and different values. And so this is our free open access resource for anyone who wants to effectively understand how people in Britain think and feel about climate and nature. And so it's really here to help you. It's full of insights, recommendations, do's and don'ts for talking about climate change to different people with different values and backgrounds. And so within Britain Talks Climate features 7 different segments of the British population, and these segments are based on More in Common's core beliefs model. And so this update of 2024 Britain Talks Climate was a collaboration between Climate Outreach, More in Common, and European Climate Foundation. And the original Britain Talks Climate, published in 2020, was the same collaboration, as well as YouGov as well. And so the 7 segments based on More in Common's core beliefs model, you can see these on the slides, and we've put the percentages up for what we see in Wales. So we have 7 distinct audience segments across Britain, and these are segmented based on their values, their core beliefs, and their identities. So really coming back to what people value and being grouped based on these values. So Britain Talks Climate and these 7 segments provides a shared and strategic understanding of the British public and identifies ways to engage across the whole of society. And so this segmentation is more than simply left versus right, leave versus remain in the EU. And it really digs into issues, including politics, but also things like gender, race, and issues such as community and safety. And so as we go through the session today, I'll refer to some of these segments throughout where we want to highlight some of the key differences that we're seeing across different segments. But what we're really going to be focusing on is what's shared. So the 7 segments helps us to understand the differences across people and the different ways they think and feel about climate change based on their values. But it also really highlights the similarities and where we can see we have more in common, and allows us to see what's shared across the British people. And that's what we're really going to be focusing on today, that what's shared level of insight. In terms of how we got to our key findings, so the research methods for Britain Talks Climate 2024 followed a mixed methods approach. So we started with 4 focus groups in December 2023. These were with 4 of the 7 British segments. We then completed a nationally representative survey of 5,100 people. We boosted the sample in both Wales and Scotland. So we had a 1,000 person sample in Wales. So we've got the nationally representative data for Wales as well. And as Alex said, we were really grateful and pleased for the collaboration of Centre for Alternative Technology and DTA Wales in the process of designing questions specific for the Wales sample. We then followed with 3 remaining focus groups with the 3 remaining 7 British segments. And we did run focus groups in both Cardiff and Bridgend, so we'll be sharing some of those insights throughout the session today as well. And then, of course, we went on to data analysis and outputs and dissemination from April 2024. And you can find all of the insights and the findings and research from this project on the Britain Talks Climate website, on the Climate Outreach website, and we have a specific page for our Wales insights as well. So on to the first key finding, appetite for climate action is strong and enduring. And so the key headline findings that we're seeing around this across Britain is that most people across Britain want to press ahead with net zero and believe that it will be good for the UK. And this is the case across age groups, regions, and nations. Most believe climate change should sit above short-term politics, so people think politicians should be working together and agreeing an approach around climate change. We're seeing that there's strong appetite for government to protect nature, to reduce pollution, and to boost clean energy. And so we're really seeing through this research the connection people have to nature and the concern around nature. And then policies that feel drastic or punitive and carry significant costs for individuals are the least popular. So we're seeing this kind of cost concern and fairness concern coming through. And so these are the key headline findings across Britain, and they're really landing in Wales as well. So specifically, people in Wales want to press ahead with net zero. In our research, 60% in Wales want to speed up or go at the current pace in net zero efforts, and only 16% of people in Wales want to see a slowdown in these efforts. So we presented some hypothetical parties in the survey to the participants, to the respondents. Party A was a party pledging to speed up efforts to reach net zero. Party B was a party pledging to go at a similar pace to the current government in efforts to reach net zero. And Party C was a party pledging to slow down efforts to reach net zero. And what we saw was the majority saying that they would vote for a party pledging to speed up or going at a similar pace. So we're really seeing that want and desire for pressing ahead with net zero in Wales. And we really heard this in the focus groups as well, this want to press ahead and not delay things. So a person from the segment we call Loyal National from Bridgend said, if I were Prime Minister, I would just build, because solar last year became the cheapest form of energy, it's cheaper than oil now. I would just build an absolute shed load of solar farms, reduce the cost of the energy for everyone, and then probably stop the subsidies that oil gets and redirect that money towards subsidies for electric cars. So this is just an example of when we really heard in the focus groups that want to press ahead, that want for these policies to keep going. Similarly, most people believe that reaching net zero will be good for Wales. So we asked the question, do you think that reaching net zero will be very good for Wales, mostly good for Wales, neither good nor bad, mostly bad or very bad? And what you can see on the graph on the screen is that the percentages of those that said it would be very good or mostly good is represented in orange, and mostly bad or very bad in blue. So you can see that real lean towards people thinking it will be good for Wales. And this is where we can start to see some of the differences across the segments. So, for example, progressive activists, very concerned about climate change, much more likely to say that net zero will be very good or mostly good for Wales. And then we can look at maybe the disengaged traditionalists. Disengaged traditionalists, slightly less concerned about climate change, not particularly opposed to climate policies on principle, but very concerned with things like process and practical viability of policies. And so we can see they're slightly less likely to think it would be good for Wales, but still that lean towards thinking it would be good over bad for Wales. In terms of specific climate policy support in Wales, we presented some different policies to see how people react and feel to certain climate change policies in Wales. And what we're seeing is that people in Wales are supportive of many climate action policies and initiatives by the Welsh Government. So, for example, increasing locally owned renewable energy capacity sees a high rate of approval. This is similar to what we're seeing across Britain, that desire for government to prioritise renewable energy rollout and pushing ahead with that. We're seeing that people are more approving than not of initiatives that focus on future generations. So they're requiring public bodies to assess the impact of their actions on future generations under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015, as well as those that provide more information on climate change initiatives. So the Climate Action Wales website and providing more initiatives on there, for example. So we're seeing that approval across people in Wales. We are seeing that enthusiasm varies across the different segments. So, for example, we see backbone conservatives and the disengaged segments less approving of the new sustainable farming scheme. But in general, we are seeing net approval for this policy. So across people in Wales, 38% are net approving of this policy. And finally, the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit initiative was the only measure that we presented which received strong net disapproval on average. And so we saw a 21% approving of this versus a 62% disapproving of this. So we saw this was the only measure presented which received that strong net disapproval. But we did hear in focus groups some understanding of why this is rolling out. So there is that kind of balance there that we're seeing in focus groups as well. But what we are seeing is that people in Wales are more than twice as likely to feel motivated to act than not. So we asked the question relating to actions you can take to help tackle climate change. Where do you place yourself on the following scale? And we go from 1, I'm highly motivated to take action on tackling climate change. And you can see that represented on the kind of orange end of the graph. To 5, I'm not concerned about taking action on climate change. And that's towards the blue end of the graph. And so we can see that real lean towards people in Wales being motivated to take action. If you look towards the bottom of the graph, we can see that motivation, 41% being motivated to act, over 16% that are not concerned about taking action. So there is that motivation among people in Wales. And again, I sat in all 7 of the focus groups, and what I was really hearing from people in Wales is this support for climate action and this motivation to take part. So a person from the segment we call Loyal National in Bridgend said, I'd probably look to get an electric car, long as, like I said, the infrastructure was put in place here. There's too many potholes, so if we're going to be investing all this money in new cars, especially electric cars, they need to sort the roads out first before people are going to invest in it. So we saw that desire to take part and to get involved, and that need for kind of infrastructure and process to be viable for them. On to the second key finding in this research, climate leadership is more likely to win votes than lose them. It offers a source of hope and the potential for reconnection. And so the key headline findings across Britain were people feel positive about government spending on climate and environmental initiatives. Alex mentioned this at the beginning. We're really seeing this positivity around government spending on this. And this relates to the word cloud that you can see on the slide here. So we asked people to write down a word that represents how they feel about government spending on climate and environmental initiatives. And 50% wrote a positive word. Happy was the word that was cited most often, with 10% writing happy. And so this is a finding that we were really surprised at Climate Outreach, and I'm really excited to be able to share that with you today, that positivity around this government spend on climate initiatives. We also see across Britain broad agreement that it's not too late to act on climate change. However, relatively few feel they've been consulted or informed by governments on climate change and climate policy. And many believe it's important that local people have a say in things that concern their local area. And relatedly, many want to hear more about climate action by government, so they don't feel like they're hearing enough about what the government is doing on climate. And again, these are our key headline findings across Britain, and we're really seeing this land in Wales. And especially in the focus groups, I really heard this coming through from people in Wales, that want for leadership and that need for kind of a collective effort and people not being left alone. And so a person from the segment we call Civic Pragmatists in Cardiff said, if the government doesn't actually provide schemes to enable everyone the opportunity to get a solar panel, then it's counterproductive, because it's not a battle that we can win as individuals. It needs to be a collective, and the collective needs to be managed and governed properly. And so that's that desire for leadership and climate leadership, and that desire for a collective action around this, and that sort of surround sound effort where everyone is getting involved, that collective effort. And there is also broad agreement among people in Wales that it is not too late to act on climate change. So 59% of people in Wales think there is still time for any UK government to implement meaningful policies to tackle climate change. A person from the segment we call Loyal National in Bridgend said, yeah, they moved that ban back on the petrol and diesel cars. I think they cancelled or reduced the heat pump subsidy or some other thing. They were going to phase out, they've pushed back as well. I can't remember what the last thing was. So we really heard that kind of want for not delaying things and going back to that need to push ahead with net zero, and that want for that and that kind of frustration over delays among people in Wales. We also see that people in Wales rate the Welsh Government's climate change track record similarly to Westminster's. So we asked the question, on the issue of tackling our contribution to climate change, would you say the Welsh Government is doing a better job than Westminster Government, about the same as Westminster Government, or a worse job than Westminster Government? And so on the graph, orange is those that think they're doing a better job. The grey colour is those thinking they're doing about the same. And the blue, those that think they're doing a worse job. And so we can see that kind of middle grey colour is where a lot of people are landing. And again, we see those differences across the segments. So we have kind of progressive activists much more likely to think Welsh Government's doing a better job than Westminster, looking down to the segment we call backbone conservative, a proud and patriotic segment, and they're kind of less likely to say to land on the side of that better job. We're also seeing, when it comes to engagement and consultation, that people in Wales don't feel informed or consulted on climate policies. In fact, they're least likely to feel informed or consulted by government in Westminster compared to people in England and Scotland. And along with that, we see that people in Wales are likely to feel angry or disappointed if they weren't consulted first before a policy. So we asked the question, imagine that the government has developed plans for a new wind farm in your local area. The government has decided to get on with the plans without consulting you or your community based on an assessment of electricity needs. Which of the following statements comes closest to your view? And the orange colour on the graph is those agreeing with the statement, I would feel angry or disappointed that the government didn't consult the community first. And the grey colour is those agreeing with, it would make no difference to how I feel about the government. And the blue colour, those agreeing with, I would feel glad or relieved that the government was getting on with it. So when it comes to climate leadership, we can see that people in Wales are most likely to say that they would feel angry or disappointed that the government didn't consult the community first, so 51%, with slightly lower percents in Scotland and England. So we can see it's important to people in Wales that they are consulted on policy ahead of it being rolled out. Again, this is something we really heard from people in Wales in focus groups as well, that want for education and understanding and consultation. A person from the segment we call civic pragmatists from Cardiff said, I think the fact that most of us don't even know much about heat pumps shows that the government should first invest in educating people about the benefits and get us understanding how this will impact our lives and stuff like that. Another person from the segment we call Civic Pragmatists in Cardiff said, I think it's important that we have more of a say, just because I think MPs are so far removed from the reality that a normal citizen is actually living in. So that want for education and understanding of kind of the personal circumstances and the reality of people's lives and how things will affect them was really coming through. A person from the segment we call Loyal National from Bridgend said, I think it's quite different because obviously with this, we are not run solely by the UK government. Like I said, we've got the Welsh government as well. So when we vote, we are not looking back who we voted for as UK-wide. It's like the local government and the Welsh Assembly is what we look at more, I think, here in Wales, as well as the bigger picture. So in focus groups discussions, what I was really hearing was participants in Wales focusing more on kind of what they feel was a lack of information and consultation by UK national government, and a real sense that they're looking to Welsh government for this leadership around climate policy in the local area. And on to the final key finding, people don't want to be left alone with this, prioritise what's tangible and make transition fair. So our key headline findings across Britain, people are concerned about what the transition will cost them. All 7 segments are most worried about higher energy bills as a result of the transition. So people are concerned about what policies will cost them, and this is understandable given this is a time of cost of living pressures and concerns. And segments are most likely to say that expecting everyone to pay for new low carbon technologies themselves is going too far. So again, that idea that people don't think everyone should be paying for this, and that concern around cost and policy. There is low perceived fairness of climate change approaches set out by various political parties and their leaders. So that fairness concern is clear across people in Britain. And in general, people tend to think public transport policies might be fair to them, but home heating policies will be unfair to them. And so these are our key headline findings across Britain. And again, we're really seeing this land in Wales. But when we're looking at specific policies around public transport and home heating, there's some slight differences that I'll go through with you for people in Wales. So whereas across Britain, people are likely to say they think public transport policies will be fair to them, people in Wales are the least likely to think that public transport policies will be fair to them. And there's much more of people in Wales are divided on whether public transport will be fair to them. So we can see that we asked the question, thinking about the policies relating to public transport that the government could put in place over the next 10 years to transition away from fossil fuels, do you think they will be definitely fair to people like me, probably be fair, probably be unfair, or definitely be unfair? And on the graph, you can see that those that think it will definitely or probably be fair is represented in orange, and probably be unfair or definitely be unfair represented in blue. And so you can see, if we look towards the bottom of the graph for Wales, 35% feel public transport will be fair compared to 39% unfair. So we can see that division, but we are seeing that across nations and regions, people in Wales are least likely to think public transport policies will be fair to them. And of course, this is in the context of knowing that Wales has the highest percent of people who own a petrol or diesel vehicle from our research, and that the lowest percent of people who do not own a car at all. And of course, Wales has a kind of higher percentage than average of population living in rural areas. So we see this context kind of affecting how people in Wales feel about public transport policies. And we know that from the research that most people don't associate public transport with positive things across Britain. So there is that kind of fairness and feelings and associations towards public transport wrapped up in these findings as well. And again, this is something we heard coming through in focus groups. So a person from the segment we call Loyal National in Bridgend said, I mean, for myself, I walk where I can. We're not far from Cardiff. I try and get a train back and forth to Cardiff. But at the moment, it is so unreliable. It's just chaos. I know there's strikes at the moment, but even before that, not very reliable. And a person from the segment we call Civic Pragmatist from Cardiff said, yeah, I think just the cost of the public transport as well. I got the bus the other day and it was like £4.40. It was nearly £5 just to buy a bus ticket. So I think the cost of public transport needs to come down as well. So there's that feelings around concern and fairness and cost towards public transport among the people in Wales. And finally, people in Wales are most likely to think home heating policies will be unfair to them. And so similarly to what we're seeing across Britain, people tend to think home heating policies will be unfair to them. We see that's especially the case in Wales. And so we asked the similar question to the one you saw on the previous slide, but asking about home heating policies that the government could put in place. And if we look towards the bottom of the graph, again, we can see Wales leaning much more towards home heating policies being unfair. So 49% believe that home heating policies will probably or definitely be unfair to people like me. And so finally, back to the 3 key findings. Hopefully what I've shared shows how we got to these key findings and how these are really landing among people in Wales. So the first, appetite for climate action is strong and enduring. The second, climate leadership is more likely to win votes than lose them. It offers a source of hope and the potential for reconnection. And third, people don't want to be left alone with this, prioritise what's tangible and make transition fair. So I'm now going to pass back over to my colleague Alex, who will take us through some of the recommendations that are coming through for policymakers and communicators from this.
Thanks so much, Emma. There was a lot to take in there. Thanks for taking us through all of it. Before I go through the recommendations, I just want to flag that we're going to have a Q&A session immediately after I've been through some of the key recommendations. So please start thinking about what you would like to ask our panelists. You can ask questions that get into the data more if you wish. You can ask about the implications. You can ask anything you want, basically. And we, as a panel, will do our best to answer your questions. If you want to ask something, the way to do it is to use the chat feature that you have on Zoom. Simply type your question into the chat And when we come to the Q&A session, I will pose your question to the panel. So feel free to start writing those now, or use this time to think about what you would like to ask. And once I've been through the recommendations, we will then come to your questions and get the panel to answer them. But before we do that, I will take you through some of the key recommendations. So this is what we feel are the key things that governments and policymakers need to take away from this research. The first one is to be clear that tackling climate change is a collective national endeavour led by government. The research overwhelmingly from Britain Talks Climate has shown that people have an appetite for government leadership on these issues, and they are looking to governments to provide a way forward and to provide leadership. So I think the key insight there for policymakers and people in government is to not shy away from that. Secondly, governments must make the transition fair, taking responsibility for investment and funding. Again, I think we can see from many of the comments that came out of the focus groups is, yes, people are looking for leadership. They're keen for this transition to happen, but they do also want it to be fair. They don't want people to unfairly carry the burden of the transition if it's not possible for them to do so. Thirdly, seize the huge opportunity to be innovative and bold in rolling out clean energy. Again, we've seen that this is one of the key areas of the transition that people are genuinely supportive of. So there is an opportunity there for government to move into that space and to try new things and to roll out clean energy, renewable energy systems at scale. Fourthly, listen, learn, and respond genuinely to those most nervous about the change. This is one of the key insights that came out of this research, but it's also something that we've highlighted again and again in all of the research that we've done over the decades that we've been doing this. It is absolutely vital to listen to people who may at first appear skeptical or cynical or resistant to change, but it is very likely that those people have genuine, well-founded worries about what the transition may mean for them and their lives. And it is the role of government, we believe, to provide a level of reassurance and support for people who feel nervous about the transition that is coming. Next, develop a national plan to listen and inspire the whole country on the climate transition. Again, over the years, we have highlighted this repeatedly. It is not enough simply to roll these policies out. The public have to be in support of them, and we believe that there is support, but that it will require a kind of national program of listening, public engagement and communication to make sure that the wider public is fully bought in to the transition that we know is coming. If I can have the next slide, please. So I'm going to take you through a few kind of do's and don'ts now. So firstly, do highlight the widespread support for leadership on climate and nature, right? I think there has historically been a feeling that people are skeptical of government action. Actually, the research shows that people are keen for government leadership, so it is always worth highlighting that. Secondly, draw out the connection between the healthy climate, thriving nature, and our own well-being. So it is certainly true that many people see action on climate change as a good thing in itself. However, support for action on climate change increases when we connect it with other co-benefits, such as health and well-being benefits and nature co-benefits that come from the transition to net zero. Thirdly, connect our British obsession with the weather to growing climate concern. I don't need to tell anyone on this call that people in the UK are obsessed with talking about the weather, and that is a good route in to talking about the changes that people are experiencing around them. Many people will have an awareness of climate change, not from reading the scientific literature, but from observing the world around them, seeing changes in the landscape and in their own gardens, and that is a fantastic jumping in point for conversations about climate change. Fourthly, talk about the progress that is already happening. I think this is really key, and it really helps people see that the transition is possible. If you can talk about the changes that have already started and the successes that we have already made and the benefits that those changes have already brought, it helps people see that the next stages of the transition will be beneficial to them and not an insurmountable task. Finally, recognize that for a lot of people, change can be scary and at times very hard. So this goes back to the point I made previously. It's absolutely essential to recognize those legitimate concerns, acknowledge that people are worried, acknowledge that some people are fearful of change, and go through a process with those people to help them understand that the benefits will bring safety and security to them, rather than worry and fear that they currently are experiencing. So those are the do's. I'm going to move on now to a couple of don'ts. Firstly, don't fuel the idea that tackling climate change is all about more hardship and sacrifice. I think there's a narrative out there which sees dealing with climate change as basically about giving things up. I think it is absolutely vital that we avoid that message. I think we should also avoid the kind of other side. I don't think we should necessarily sugarcoat it. We need to acknowledge that, tackling climate change will mean change, but I think it's key that we don't view the transition as one of giving up, of sacrifice, and of hardship. It's key that we don't communicate it to the public as such. Next, don't talk of drastic or draconian approaches. So I think there's often a lot of talk about the kind of wide sweeping measures. I mean, we've seen, for example, with low traffic neighborhoods that sometimes kind of fairly sensible measures are exaggerated into huge conspiracy theories. As communicators, it's our responsibility to make sure that we represent the changes that need to happen in a reasonable manner, and confront communicators who exaggerate what those changes might mean or try to kind of whip up hysteria around them. Finally, don't pit aspects of climate change and the nature crisis against each other. As we've said before, talk about the co-benefits. Don't play off nature and climate change or climate change and health benefits against each other. Try as far as possible to present them as co-benefits. So those are the key recommendations. Thank you, all of you, for coming with us on this journey. Thank you, Emma, for presenting the insights so clearly. We're now going to move to the Q&A session. So feel free to post your questions in the chat. I can already see that we've got some coming in. You can post them publicly if you wish. Some people are posting them to me privately, which is absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is begin by posing a few of these questions to the panel. I'm going to ask the panelists just to simply leap in as they feel inspired to answer them. Okay, let's go with the first question. So I'm going to ask our panel, I'm kind of paraphrasing the question here, but there are some key differences between what we found in the nationwide survey across the UK and what we found in the Wales specific survey. Why do you think that these differences exist between Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom? I'm going to go to Emma first on this one, and then if any of the other panelists would like to jump in with an insight, you are very welcome. Emma, go for it. Why do you feel that some of these differences exist?
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, great question. I think that the differences exist because it's different contexts and different situations in kind of Wales, England, and Scotland. And so I think that we do see those differences because, yes, we can get the kind of average across Britain, but we know that there is different context in Wales, for example. So when we're looking at public transport, we know that there's those different contexts of kind of higher than average people living in rural areas that maybe aren't well connected by public transport or other things. And So I think those contexts are really key, and I think that's I think that's a good thing that we're seeing those differences, because we know that there is differences across Britain, and in Wales and in Scotland and in England. So then we can really try to kind of use those differences to build our engagement meaningfully and purposely for what the contexts are.
Thank you, Emma. Matt, if I can come to you now, you've been working extensively with communities in Wales at quite a kind of grassroots, on the ground level in the work that DTA Wales does. Can you shed any light, any more insight on this question of why some of the results that we've seen are so different in Wales than they are in the rest of the UK? Is there anything from your kind of more direct work with communities that helps explain that?
Well, I suppose, as Emma said, it is a different context in Wales. There's a Welsh government for one thing, with very different climate policies over a lot of different sectors than the UK government, and the people that we're talking to will be aware of that. And I suppose so that might explain some of the differences in terms of their understanding of what kind of policies and so on how that might affect them. But yeah, I mean, I think essentially people otherwise, I don't know, like people in Wales working at the community level in a similar way to people are in other parts of the UK. I have less understanding really of what happens in the rest of the UK at that level, obviously, because I'm focused on Wales. But we do have our sister organisations working like locality in England and DTA Scotland and Northern Ireland that we work with from time to time. But I think in general, it's probably like Emma said, that it's the different context that people are in. Like there's a much wider rural areas here compared to perhaps elsewhere in the UK, and so that might affect some of their understanding of their approach to the issues.
If I could jump in on this one as well, Alex.
Yeah, go for it.
So when we're building the more in common segments, it's very much based on our values and how our values shape how we perceive all the issues affecting us in our lives. And so in addition to the point about the policy context, I think the point about there being more rural areas in Wales is very important here, because we might see a higher concentration of these segments that have different views on climates because of that. Because if you have certain values that shape your worldview, you might be more likely to want to live in a rural area. And so we're seeing an overrepresentation of people with different types of worldviews in Wales compared to other parts of the country, perhaps.
That's great. Thank you, panelists. I'm going to move on and try and get through a few more of our questions. So we may try and cover a few of these really quickly. We've got a question here. Someone is interested in the panelists' view on effective models of public involvement in decision making on climate action. Do they feel the need to sit on national, regional, local levels, or all at once? How should the model vary across different locations, if so? Can I ask one of our panel to jump in on that question? Effective models of public engagement on climate change. Go for it. Anyone who has an insight that they would like to offer.
I can hop in here.
Yeah,
because
great, Jenna, go for it.
One of the questions that we asked in the survey is actually what level of government people would like to see leading on different areas. And what we found is that there's no real one solution to this. So it depends on kind of the area that you're looking at. So when we're looking at very big strategic decisions, such as where to put infrastructure, that's more effective when it's led by the national government. But when we're talking about potholes and local transport networks, that's something that would be more effective when we're looking at local governments and councils. Emma, I don't know if maybe you have some particular insights on Wales from that question, but yeah, so basically there's no one solution to the effective model, and it needs to be kind of tailored to the context and also what type of climate policy we're talking about.
Yeah, I can just very quickly add that, thank you, Jenna. I think when it comes to kind of trust as well in leadership and where that trust falls, we know that that people in Wales tend to trust either UK national government, Welsh government, or local authorities on various aspects of the transition. But we do know there's that chunk of around a quarter that trust none of them. So I think there is that work to do on trust as well. And we do have some new research coming out next week around trust and what that means to the 7 segments. So encourage you to sign up for that webinar as well.
Thank
And
you.
if I can quickly jump in, Alex, on the same one.
Yes, yeah, Namira, go for it.
I mean, it's been said before, but just to sort of reiterate, the majority of people from our research, we find that they want politicians to work together. So this is not just sort of across the political spectrum, but also across the hierarchy of where the politicians sit. And they want politicians to sort of colloquially say, to just get on with the work that is required. And I think it helps here to remind ourselves that the climate and nature crisis are still the 4th highest priority for people, and for some much higher ahead of the general election. So we see for some people, nature closer to home in their local boroughs holds more important. And for other segments, nature or climate crisis at a global level holds more sort of significant. So it's all about sort of bringing the story and the narratives together. And if there's sort of a balancing act that the politicians and the governments need to do, some of the principles to make sure that we incorporate in this balancing act is to listen and make sure you are actually hearing what people are saying. Also to normalize and to storytell about and the sort of diversity of people, again, based on the values that these people hold. It's been said before, but to reiterate, it's important to excite people about the positive benefits that are involved with this transition. And lastly, to reassure. I think the main job of this balancing act that is required is to reassure the public that the transition will be okay. So, you know, the government needs to take the heat out of this and sort of do more of the reassurance act as well.
Thank you very much, Namira. I'm going to give you the last word there on the Q&A before handing back to Ellen Shepherd to give us a few closing remarks and insights before we wrap up.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you everybody for the presentations and the contributions, and the questions in the Q&A are really insightful as well. I think hearing what we've been listening to this morning, it's confirming to an extent what we already knew and reinforces some of those messages. It also adds a lot of richness, especially the details coming through from the focus groups, which really helps deepen our understanding and helps really inform our approach around targeting messages, and some of that more direct feedback, wanting to hear more about what government is doing, how people feel about how they're consulted. We might think that we're doing a certain amount or a certain level, but actually that's not how it's feeling or how it's landing. So a good question for us to go back and evaluate whether what we're doing is working and reaching the people it needs to reach. Alex, I really appreciated your finding about, or your message or your advice to leaders around don't shy away from this. And hopefully it's encouraging that the new Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change and Rural Affairs in the Welsh Government has been quite clear on this, that his commitment to net zero is unwavering. So that was in a statement to the Senedd in the last 10 days. But obviously there's always more to do. There's always more engagement, more action, more that we could be doing. I think the message that's coming through really clearly is about that collaboration between not just the cross-party, but also the levels of government, and also engaging with communities at those levels. So a lot for us to take back, and it's really insightful. So thank you very much for that. We're really grateful and keen to continue the conversation as well.
Thank you, Ellen. If we can share the final survey slide, please, that would be amazing. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to help us fill in a short survey, a short poll that helps us understand the impact of our work. So you can see on your screens there is a QR code. You can zap that with your phone, or you can put the code in and fill in the questions there. We're doing this because it really helps us understand how our work gets used, how it's deployed, how it is useful to people. So it's absolutely crucial because it really helps us get a picture of who's using our research, why they're using it, what they're doing with it. So it's incredibly helpful for us if you can fill that in. It just remains for me to thank everyone who has participated today, primarily everyone who came to the session, who was motivated to come and understand these insights and to think deeply about what they mean. I hope it has been useful. I hope it has helped you think through your own work and what you might do, how you might change things, how you might shift the way you do public engagement. Of course, I would like to thank everyone who has presented and contributed today. Thank you to the research team at Climate Outreach, partners at DTA Wales and Centre for Alternative Technology, our panel, to Ellen, to More in Common, and everyone who has contributed, and of course to our funders, the European Climate Foundation, for supporting the work from the beginning. So with that, we are slightly over time. So I will wrap up the session and hope to see you all soon. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.